Eli lay stretched out on his old leather sofa, his head hanging back and his eyes shut tight, as though by closing them he could escape the world pressing in on him. It had become his habit lately, lying like this in the quiet of his small apartment, feeling the weight of his own thoughts settle over him like a blanket that grew heavier with each passing day. He was tired, tired of the routines, tired of the silence, tired of himself. The city sounds drifted through his open window, the hum of distant cars, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers below, the faint thump of music from an apartment nearby. Life was all around him, close enough to reach out and touch, but he felt detached from it, as if some invisible wall separated him from the living. He tried to tell himself it was temporary, that this feeling, whatever it was, would pass. He'd taken long walks, read old books, sat in cafes watching people come and go, trying to spark some sense of connection, some whisper of purpose, but nothing reached him. Lately he'd been haunted by a persistent thought, the desire to start anew, to fling off his life as if it were an old coat he could just shed and leave behind. He wanted to leave his job, leave his city, leave everything that had grown so familiar it had become suffocating. There was a part of him buried deep down that yearned for a fresh beginning, a chance to become someone he had not yet been. But what then? How did one remake oneself? He didn't know, and that was the source of his torment. A hunger for something undefined, a thirst for a life he could imagine only in the hazy corners of his mind. His thoughts were heavy with this emptiness, a constant gnawing that he could neither satisfy nor understand. He opened his eyes, staring up at the ceiling as if it held answers he could not find. His apartment was filled with relics of his life, books stacked haphazardly on shelves, half-finished canvases leaning against the wall from his failed attempts at painting, a guitar gathering dust in the corner. These objects felt like memories of lives he had tried to live, roles he had tested and abandoned. Each one reminded him of a version of himself he'd left behind, discarded like old clothes that no longer fit. But none of these roles, these masks, had ever satisfied him for long. Beneath each attempt, he remained the same, burdened by a restless dissatisfaction that clung to him like a shadow. He could play at being an artist, a musician, a writer, but the act always crumbled under the weight of his own doubts. Who was he really? He had no answer. Eli sat up, suddenly overwhelmed by the silence around him. It felt thick, oppressive, pressing against his skin. He looked around, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The emptiness of his apartment seemed to mirror the emptiness inside him, each silent corner a reminder of something missing, something he could not name. In a sudden impulse, he grabbed his coat and left the apartment, stepping into the cool night air. The city was alive around him, lights glinting in windows, voices drifting through the streets. He walked without aim, letting his feet carry him through familiar streets that felt foreign in the night. Eventually he found himself by the river, the water reflecting the city lights in rippling patterns. He leaned against the railing, staring into the dark water, feeling as though he were staring into his own mind. The river was calm, steady, moving with purpose. It seemed to mock him, as if to say, "Look at me. I know my path. I flow toward the sea, unwavering." Eli closed his eyes, letting the night air fill his lungs. He thought of everything he had wanted to be, every life he had imagined and discarded, every dream that had withered in his mind. He felt the weight of them pressing on him, all these unfulfilled selves, each one an echo of what might have been. And then, in the stillness, a realization struck him. Perhaps he had been searching for the wrong thing. Perhaps it wasn't about finding the perfect path, the perfect life, but simply about moving forward, about embracing the unknown and letting each step create its own meaning. He had been waiting for purpose to reveal itself, as though it were something outside of him, something he could grasp and hold. But maybe purpose wasn't a destination. It was the act of searching itself, the willingness to keep moving, to keep asking. The thought brought him a strange sense of peace, a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He opened his eyes, looking out over the city with a new sense of clarity. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and that was all right. He would let himself drift, like the river, moving forward without needing to know where he was going. For the first time, he felt truly alive.